felt vaguely shocked as Donna and I became increasingly more familiar, but maybe they also knew that Donna took no prisoners, for I was beginning to feel more and more like an appliance. I had my own way of paying back. Teasing Donna was easy for me, especially since I had a reliable two-woman audience to count on for applause. A simple question, thrown out in jest, but laced with mock gravitas. "Are you sure you want so many onions in this stir-fry? It might overwhelm the dish," was guaranteed to get a rise. Donna's "you're a dead man" expression as she whipped her head around from the stove was as predictable as a Swiss clock. But I craved more than just an afternoon playdate. I wanted to find out where all this fabulous food came from. "Will you take me to the market with you, and to the fish store before you make sushi?" I asked on the first day. "We'll see," Donna said. After breakfast on the second morning, without a word of warning, Donna appeared on the deck and announced, "We go now." "Go where?" I asked. "To the fish market," she said. So off we went to the little green shack at the water's edge on the other side of the island. Donna had promised lobster that night, and already the boats, in all shades of Crayola colors, were pulling up on the beach. I marvel as none held up great creatures just pulled from the Caribbean. Donna talked with them in dialogue so fast, furious, and foreign that I couldn't find an English word to save me, although I knew they were hidden in the conversation. Would I have walked up to these guys and struck up a conversation had she not been with me? Not on your life. I would have felt like a #1 fool. Donna was my key into their world, giving me a kind of VIP status that money alone couldn't buy. A few tourists had ventured in to inspect the catch of the day. I felt infinitely superior to them as they poked and sniffed around before settling on a few fillets that were quickly wrapped before they scooted out the door. I was still chatting with the store's owner, still oohing and ahhing as more fish came in. After Donna and I picked out our lobster, she took a picture of me next to the man who had caught it, holding it high as we both beamed while trying to say cheese as Donna had commanded. Across the street was the grocery store. While it had its Caribbean touches, I felt as if I'd been to this place many times in the course of my life. How different can a store be when its shelves are stocked with mostly familiar items? And here I was at the first time surrounded by fellow whites who were speaking English, yes, but also German, French, and Italian. My cultural focus had shifted, but all it did was make me feel cooler than I had before. "I'm with Donna, folks," I was thinking, "so best not get in our way." For an entire week, the day began each morning after breakfast with, "Come on, we go now." Donna's all-aboard call always felt like a whim, as nothing had ever been discussed prior to departure. On the last day, though, I was prepared but also confused, for Donna wouldn't say where we were headed. She just kept giggling as we drove to the mysterious destination, and I continued begging for information. When we reached the beachfront villa, I knew something was up, for this place had "special" written all over it, from the location, smack on the sand, to the elongated entryway that spoke of wealth and seclusion. "My sister is Mick Jagger's cook," Donna said. "This is his place." For a child of the 1960s, entering Mick Jagger's home might equal the thrill a modern teen would feel if invited to visit all the vampires on the set of the Twilight movies. Denise greeted us at the door for a guided tour. There was Mick's pink pool table. Denise and Donna cheerfully posed behind it for a snap. On a bureau was a picture of his mother, smiling and waving furiously. I laughed, Donna and Denise laughed, because I was laughing. We all ended up in the kitchen, where I inspected the drop-dead appliances. They made the ones at Sapphire, which looked like they might have belonged to June Cleaver on Leave It to Beaver, seemed horribly out of date. I even wondered if Donna might be a tad envious. I would have been. We finished the tour with coffee and cake, as I learned that the two sister cooks had 6 other siblings, 5 girls whose names all started with D, and a brother, Oral. Suddenly, that was funny, too. On my last night at Sapphire, I drank the juice from my ceviche straight from the bowl just after Pearl left the room so she wouldn't see my exhibition of bad manners. After dinner, I helped clear plates, as I'd done most nights, and stopped worrying if pitching in might actually be insulting. After all, Donna, Pearl, and Pat were professionals with jobs to do, but weren't they now also my friends? They were both, I decided, and friends don't let friends clear plates by themselves. I rang the dinner bell, and we had a final laugh. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. The next reader is Elizabeth Eaves. Elizabeth's writing has a... No, I'm sorry, it's Simon. That was my decision. I should have remembered the order of readers. The next reader is Simon Winchester. As many of you probably know, Simon has a new book out called Atlantic. I was actually told this evening by the bookstore person that it's the #1 selling book here. Which is nice, isn't it? And he's the author of many, many other best-selling books, including The Professor and the Madman and Krakatoa, The Map That Changed the World. I've enjoyed a wonderful, long friendship and professional relationship with Simon, and it's a tremendous pleasure to have him in this book, as in the other books I've edited. And now, Simon Winchester.
Thanks very much indeed. First of all, I should say why I'm dressed in this rather ridiculous get-up. Memorial service at St. Bart's on Park Avenue. The editor who discovered The Professor and the Madman, Larry Ashmead, died 2 months ago. And today there was a turnout of all of the publishing literati of New York, and from London indeed. And so I had to dress up and pay my respects, which are of course enormous, because he totally changed my life in discovering that book. However, everything's going to change now, because by the time I've finished reading you this short piece, you will all hate me. And if there's anyone here from PETA, I shall probably be attacked. Seldom has anything that I have written over the years ever brought forth from readers a truly violent reaction. Of course, like any scrivener, I manage from time to time to get things wrong, and people have sent notes couched in tones kindly or occasionally less charitable to correct me. A few people get quite rude, and to be sure, once in a very long while, things have become a little more heated. One book I wrote was so loathed by a particular critic that he said he wanted nothing more than to drop-kick it out of his backyard. And once I offended so many people in the Cayman Islands that a group called the Trade Winds wrote a calypso about me with a charmingly melodious chorus that included the words, "If you get a dog, call it Rover. If you get a cat, name it Tabby. If you get a parrot, call it Polly. But if it come to pass that you get a jackass, call it Simon Winchester." This calypso, by the way, got to #3 in the Canadian hit parade, and is still whistled at me by cheeky reception clerks when I check into hotels in Georgetown. But as I say, generally speaking, nothing truly awful, nothing violent, no hexes or public curses, no threats of enforced exile or public maiming. Until, that is, one day in the early 1990s, when I wrote a perfectly innocent little essay about the time I ate a dog. It was, as I recall, an unexceptional and not very pretty yellow dog, of the sort that one sees in the outback of Australia. It might have been called a dingo, or a close relative of a dingo, and wasn't the sort of animal upon which one wished to heap affection. But I'm getting ahead of myself here, so powerful is the memory. First things first. I was in Korea, and it was a cold and rainy day in late March. I'd been walking in the hills to the south of Seoul with a friend, Mr. Kim, who was at the time a similarly keen hiker. We'd been up since before dawn and were by now wet through and weary of the day, when my friend, who was a former soldier in the Korean army, who was acting as my translator, suggested that we adjourn for a good and warming lunch. He said he knew a place. And so, after a further half hour of walking, we turned down from the hills and emerged from the trees at the head of a narrow valley where there was a village, and beside its rain-swollen stream a small market. It was far from impressive. It was a little more than a network of muddy lanes lined with stalls and display cabinets, and with what appeared to be cages, all protected from the sheeting rain by pieces of plastic. Eventually, after a minute or two of head-scratching, he found the inn that he said he knew and liked. Its owner seemed to be a large and very boisterous and motherly woman, the kind you might find in a Dickensian grog shop, and the two of them beckoned to me to come to their stall and to an entrance behind it. To get inside, we dived behind some more sheets of dripping plastic and then squeezed through a tiny entranceway into what seemed to be a hidden room lined with walls made of plaited straw. It was quite dry here and nicely warm. 3 or 4 of the tables were occupied. It wasn't terribly noisy, just the normal buzz of amiable conversation. Most of the customers were men, and most were smoking. There was a cosy fug about the place, of the kind already faded into the recent past. 2 bottles of Korean beer had been placed waiting on the table, and as we sat down and started unlacing our walking boots and taking off our dripping anoraks and sou'westers, so the owner lady, who was introduced with much smiling and bowing as Mrs. Kim, inevitably, wafted in with 2 earthenware bowls of steaming soup. Poshin Tang, she declared brightly, and gave each one of us the long, narrow metal spoons that the Koreans like to use, and a pair of joined-up wooden chopsticks in a small red envelope. Another serving wench, a lady as enormous and cheery as the first, then deposited a range of bowls and saucers with salt and beans and pickles and rice and kimchi, of course, around the soup bowls, and retired to an anteroom as we tucked in. And my word, what soup! Hot and spicy and as curiously strong as those mints. There were pieces of ginseng and sweet radish and onion and garlic and chunks of a rich meat that somehow out-beefed any beef I knew. The soup steamed and raged, almost bubbling with energy. After a few spoonfuls, all the chill of the drear outside retreated, and suddenly there was fire inside, and I felt as though I'd been plugged into some kind of battery charger, and was in an instant just good and ready to hurl myself outside to take on the elements once again. I chugged my beer and spooned down more and more soup, my insides now ablaze and my vitals back in full working order, and all the muscles' aches vanished clear away. I must have become different in aspect too, because my soldier guide Kim leaned over the table and remarked on the glow in my cheeks and said that he just knew that I'd be happy in this place and that a bowl of Poshin Tang would do the trick. What on earth was it? I asked him. And he called out to Mrs. Kim, who was not, so far as I was aware, either his mother or his aunt or his wife, but just one of a host of 5 million Kims in a country that allows very few family names, and asked her to explain. At which point she opened a door in the straw wall of her little cafe, and there in the back was a cage, and in the cage was, of course, the aforementioned yellow dingo-type non-Australian dog. I wish I could admit that I was shocked, but I wasn't, not at all. I'm as much of a caninophile as the next Englishman. I had a beagle at the time, named Biggles, and I adored him as if he were my own child, almost. The thought of eating a soup made of any relative of Biggles, however distant, was theoretically just beyond repugnant, or at least it had been before this. But now I felt somehow altered, curious, different, drugged maybe. And so as Mrs. Kim was showing me the dog, offering me the dog, I thought it all out to myself one point at a time. This is what they do here. They eat dogs, just as some of us eat cows or pigs. This lunch is actually pretty delicious, and besides, I'm a writer and I'm supposed to try anything and everything subject to the usual codes of morals and decency, I feel I must add. So, yes, Mrs. Kim, I nodded at her. Hit me with it. Yes, Mrs. K, more please. And she winked, went back out into the kitchen, did something I just don't want to think about or ever imagine, and after a few moments returned grinning, and this time with an earthenware plate that was heaped with onions, rice, and layered on top of the mound a dozen or so small oval slices of meat smothered in a richly aromatic gravy. Médaillons de chien corénoise. It could be nothing else. There must have been a moment's hesitation, but no more than that. I picked up my chopsticks and with the 2 unrelated Kims beaming from the sidelines, tucked in happily, finished the plate in 5 minutes, licked chops and sticks with equal vigour, and then said to myself, I've just got to write about this. And so I promptly did 800 crisp words, and I faxed it off. This was during the strange limbo period, before the birth of email, but after the death of telex, when foreign correspondents like me had the damnedest time sending copy around the world, to a small magazine I knew in London, after which, except for the moment a week or so later when the cheque came in, and a month or so later when a copy of the magazine itself followed, I forgot all about it. Except that the editor, a gentle and fragrant lady, not herself a dog owner, but an Englishwoman of some sensitivity, rang me up one day not long after publication. The letters, she said. You wouldn't believe it. Hundreds and hundreds of them. Sacks full of letters. Never seen anything like it. Every day, twice a day, special deliveries. Torrents of letters, and every single one of them abusive. The worst language imaginable. Threats, taunts, warning. You should come down here and read them. It's just wild. And so I travelled down to London on the train from Oxford and found my poor benighted editor friend sitting woefully amidst a Vesuvian pile of envelopes and cards and Royal Mail sacks unopened. We laughed at the sight as much in terror as in joy, and then spent the rest of the day ploughing through the mail and working hard to try to understand more fully the near mystical connection that apparently exists between the species Homo not especially sapiens britannicus and Canis familiaris. I expect you can imagine the tone of most of the correspondence. Suffice to say, it could not in any way be described as fan mail, unless the